Retro.
Hi, this is Claudia Gray, the author of several Star Wars books, and you are listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. May the Force be with you.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we have the second half of our Trials of the Jedi discussion on tap for this episode. But before we get into that, Jay will remind everybody where we can be found online.
Absolutely, Dennis. We are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the digital line, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So this is, again, part 2 of our discussion of Trials of the Jedi, which is the final novel and pretty much the wrap-up of the High Republic era. And it was written by Charles Soule. If you were with us a week ago, we had the first half of our discussion with Greg Cass, who is from Long Take Review Podcast and the Rebel Base Card. You've heard Jen Subchakchoy and Greg McLaughlin on the show, so you know his co-hosts on the show from those episodes quite well. And then he's also found as Ion Cannon on Instagram, and he's got lots of fun Star Wars stuff to say over there. Mm-hmm. We had such a great conversation about Trials of the Jedi, and normally I try to keep conversations to 45 minutes, and we sailed way past that when we recorded that conversation. And,
so easy to do, though. I mean, there's such great goodness in that book.
Yes, absolutely. And rather than put it out as a episode that is twice as long as what we like to usually do, I mean, I try to keep our movie review episodes to an hour or less, but we've been creeping on beyond that as of late. With this being well over an hour and a half, I just wanted to keep it digestible. So that's why we split into two. We covered a lot about Marchion Ro last time and the things that were going on with the Nameless Planet, but then we are kind of hitting the rest of the big aspects of this book in this episode. So with that having been said, let's dive on into part 2 of our discussion of Trials of the Jedi by Charles Soule. Greg, but it's back to you. What next do you want to discuss?
Our form of balance is that you and I forget the things, and Jay has too many notes to find the one quickly. So it's really yin and yang there as well, yin and yang there. Well, and we've talked around them a little bit. So I would again say I want to ask about Elzar and Avar, because I think, again, if the High Republic, good storytellers always push boundaries and change expectations. And so to have these two Jedi form what I would call like a healthy attachment, as opposed to Anakin's unhealthy attachment that we revisit in the prequels. I just want to ask kind of how are you thinking about Avar and Elzar? Obviously that will very much come to the end of their story and where they end up, which we've alluded to a couple times. But I do think, earlier parts of the book are kind of questionable too, right? Like when they're deciding who gets to go on these missions, and there's clearly some ways in which attachment plays into that. Is this something we should see as what Padme and Anakin, for example, could have been, or is this the cautionary tale and this is why we needed to ban attachments? And just because it made me giggle just a little, I will say one of the funniest moments in the book to me, which you don't have to involve in your comments, is when Burryaga overhears them and they just kind of, the two fellas snicker, kind of knowing that I had very college dorm vibes, and I'll leave it broad like that, but it really felt it really made me chuckle. It was kind of a delightful moment.
Sophros, the planet's name is
Yes,
Sophros.
I was just gonna say that. Yep, you beat me to it. Good job.
Page 419.
Okay.
There you go. Oh my gosh, no, Greg. I specifically did bookmark that particular passage as well, because it was just, kind of like, oh, what? And Bell is saying, I know my Shriwook is not perfect, but did he just say what I thought he said, kind of thing? Oh my gosh. So, for me, I think with Avar and Elzar, yeah, and Dennis and I have talked about this a lot before in terms of attachment versus possession. And that's what basically Anakin had with Padme, was more of a possession obsessive type of thing. And whereas with Avar and Elzar, they love each other, but yet they know where that love stands in the grand scheme of things, with their duty, with their life as Jedi, with what needs to be done. And I mean, and it's obvious that at the end they chose their love to be kind of a vessel for helping the rest of the galaxy. And it was because of that love and because of that attachment that they had for each other that they were able to say, okay, let's do this together, because we can do this together. And again, that's kind of where the whole idea for me of the dyad comes in, because Avar said, I will be the light, and Elzar said, and I will be the dark.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, Dennis, what do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the strengths of this book is highlighting these issues around attachment, because I think far too often attachment is oversimplified when it comes to Star Wars. We know the Jedi forbid attachment, and everyone just interprets that as like, oh, you can't have a girlfriend, you can't have a boyfriend, you can't have any type of romantic entanglement. And then they extend it, it's like you can't even really have a friend. Well, that's nonsense. The Jedi had friends all the time. And Jay, what you said here, it's the unhealthy possession. It is the fear of loss that the Jedi are talking about here. Avar and Elzar didn't have that here. While they were concerned for each other, while they were concerned for each other's well-being, if something had happened to Avar, Elzar would have had much more time than if it had been the reverse. If something had happened to Elzar and Avar had to deal with that. But their relationship gave the other one strength. We got to see that in other books when Avar was behind the storm wall and she got Elzar's message, how much that meant to her, how much it reinforced her and allowed her to keep going and get back to the Republic in the situation. And so are they a dyad, as you asked earlier, Jay? Yeah, they are. Not in the sense that maybe Rey and Kylo Ren were, something that was necessarily created by the Force. These two created a relationship in a way that allowed them to balance aspects of the Force that was necessary to do what needed to be done on Sophros. I'm so glad I looked up that word. So now, but I was satisfied with this. It was kind of when I was talking earlier about my overall thoughts on this, how it's almost tragic in a way, and it's like my first instinct was these two who had worked out, who had sorted everything out over the course of the series, now can no longer really be together. But that's only physically. They're there on the planet. They're always in connection with each other, and they're working together, and that's enough for them. They've found a way to make the relationship work. It does not require this tragic attachment that is Padme and Anakin from the saga there. That's what I think about it. Anyone have any
I
final
think
thoughts?
that's well said. No, it's very well said. Because I know we don't want to overuse the word dyad anyways, because
Mhm.
I mean it in and of itself, it is considered to be a very uh you know not once in a lifetime kind of thing. It's
Mhm.
it's not something that you can just throw that term around all willy-nilly. So
All right.
I think it's well said.
Where did we leave off? Was that Greg's question or your question?
I think it was mine. So I think it's
Okay.
over to Jay.
Jay, your turn. What next do we want to discuss here?
Okay, so I love the idea, talking about Elzar and Avar here. There's a lot of what I'd like to call power couples in this novel, and not from a romantic standpoint, but for example, I absolutely just loved being able to follow the entire saga slash relationship between Porter Engle and Admiral Veiss, and the way that that
General.
ended up. General Veiss, thank you. And the way that that ended up, because they were both such long-lived species, and there was such a tragedy, obviously, that happened with Porter's sister, and that's where we got the brash vow from. And then now to see that kind of come full circle, and to see that relationship, and again, getting her comeuppance in that. And I just love the way that Porter said at the very end, "If you see my sister, tell her I said hello." It's just it's so him, and just the way that he comes back in as the Blade of Bardata, and just the entrance that he makes. But I just love the dynamic between the two of them, and I just really enjoyed reading that culmination of that entire, relationship, if you will, throughout the time. So there's that one. Some of the others, I would say Burry and Bell are a power couple. I mean, they really, um, their friendship goes so deep, and just the fact that Burry was willing to sacrifice himself for Ember, and of course, Bell was willing to sacrifice himself for Burry and never gave up hope that he was alive and rescued him. So there's that one, but there's a few other ones as well. But I just want to get both of your reactions to those two specifically. So, Greg, what do you think of those two power couples?
Well, and I like the expansive definition of power couple, because I do think that's fitting. Um, and gosh, I think when I imagine somebody who hasn't read everything in High Republic, I just wish I could just give them the broad strokes of the Porter Engle, General Veiss story, because that is one that I really didn't expect to feel so satisfying in this conclusion. And Porter Engle really snuck up on me, right? Like I enjoyed him in the first book, to be sure. But when we met so many characters in Light of the Jedi, I kind of forgot about Porter Engle. And then the comic series you alluded to, Jay, the Blade. Sorry, the Bardata is the full title, but the title of the comic is just the Blade. It was kind of a tough read at times, only that it was so new and different to me that I wasn't quite sure. Oh, I'm on this planet and there's a conflict, and I didn't really get it. But I did sit down before Light of the Jedi and I read through. I think I bought the trade paperback, so I finally read through it all, one after another. And then the really satisfying way he showed up behind the storm wall in the earlier books in Phase 3, and then here kind of getting to really fight it out is really wonderful. And I so love, I mean, you identified the correct power couple there, but also like then you think of just Porter and Barash, and that's like a beautiful Star Wars story where again they meant so much to each other. Maybe that's another healthy version of attachment, right? They are attached to each other and care so deeply about each other, but he's also kind of let her go in some ways, right? Like he's mourned the loss and he's tried to understand the loss, which is much healthier than we see in those possession forms that you were referencing. So that is a wonderful part of this story, and I do like again how long we now have their story. I will use that as my moment to say I was surprised in Phase 3 how much reading Phase 2 mattered. And that was a big part of it as well. That, I think because of the structure of the flashing back in time, it felt like that those were almost separate. And I was so glad that I had read, that phase and had that in my pocket. I wonder if we'll get the debates like we do of the movies, if people should start with Phase 2 and then go forward, or what have you, when people discover this in the future. Bell and Burryaga, if I'm completely honest, I've tried so hard to really appreciate the way Burryaga got lost after Starlight and survived underwater in the air pocket cave, eating moss and sending out hairballs. That it's something I struggle with because it's all a little silly, and it's like, really, like months like that, and yet I do completely agree that I loved reading them in this book and their strong connection, the silly moment we mentioned earlier, but also just the way they cared for each other and looked out for each other in the battle. At the end, the kind of final confrontations. Have to add Ember into the mix. I know that messes up the couple dynamic, but in case we don't get back around to it, Bell's bookend involving his dive off the cliff to save Ember in just the way Loden Greatstorm taught him, chef's kiss, just wonderful. And I really enjoyed those stories as well. So I feel like I'm just gushing about everything. I offered a couple quibbles in there, but I do really enjoy how these couples landed.
Absolutely. And we could expand too. I mean, you could put so many more in there. I mean, I would even consider Reith and Aslan, in that way, and
Well, let's
their
contain it
dynamic
because
that
those
they
are
had.
separate points that
Yeah.
I'm going to bring up in a
Right,
bit
right, right.
as
No, I
well.
want you to go ahead and go, Dennis, because I mean, there's so many of those that we could outline. But yes,
Yeah. Yeah, I
please,
want to give
please
everyone their
take
just
the floor.
desserts
Yes.
when it comes down to it. So, okay, I'm going to address Bell and Burryaga really quick, and solely from the aspect of the relationship. And I love how Wookiees are synonymous with conscience. And we saw, that Chewbacca and Han Solo, Chewbacca and Rey. The Wookiees are quiet. No one understands everything they say, but you know it when it matters. When it comes to a Wookiee, and it can be just a look, it can be a single growl, it can be a mew and stuff like that. And by saying less, Burryaga got through to Bell. Burryaga's, had a duty. It's like he wanted to be there for his friend, but oh yeah, Tarek is injured over there. And so Burryaga found the strength to attend to both of them at that time. And then later when Ember's and going off the cliff, Burryaga jumps after him. And then, I love the little bit in the book where we get the perspective of Ember and, the home friend and the tall friend and, the different packs that she's had in life. That's fantastic. I'm going to bring Bell up again later because I think he's, if it gets around to it, we'll see how long. We're way into this conversation. We got so much more to discuss. But Porter Engle, I loved that portion of this book. And comparatively speaking, he doesn't get that many pages compared to Avar and Elzar, Azlin, Reith, any other the characters here. But he had a story to resolve. And the way he went about everything, he shows up at the Battle of Eriadu and he opens up the canopy and he's throwing his lightsaber around just to taking out ships, single-handedly turning the tide of that battle at one point. Gets aboard Vice's flagship and gets on the comms and tells everyone, yeah, I'm here. You know who I am. I am, I'm Porter Engle. It's best you get out of my way. I'm here for one purpose and one purpose only. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. And then he ends up in that room with General Veiss. She's got her ceremonial armor on. And then he tells her, it's like, I've been wondering why you're still alive. And then he confesses, it's like, because there's some part of me in the back of my mind that knows that if I end you, then there's some possibility that what happened to Barash. And if I end you, then I cut that off. But then he, being the Jedi he is, he makes peace with that. And he does what needs to be done. And he even has that entire subsequent thought process as he's going back to that planet from the comic, I can't even remember the name of the planet, which is where, Barash ended up taking the vow when things went south. And he's going on about how, he's the blade. He's the destroyer that the Jedi need. He is that guy that wears the black hat for the Jedi so that the rest of them don't have to in that regard. And I love how he tells her, it's like, there's only 10,000 Jedi in the galaxy. There's trillions of people in the galaxy. Most people haven't even seen a Jedi. We are the best at what we do. We are the best at wielding lightsabers. So why do you think you're still alive? And the thing is he's not gloating. He is just, he's making her realize all of this is and for as thoughtful as he is, she is thoughtful in her way, but it's so delightfully clueless at times when she's thinking about her memoirs that she's going to write. And the first title she comes with is A Warrior's True Truths. I mean, I was listening to audiobook and the other day when I was reading that, when I was walking my dogs, and I stopped because I was just laughing, all these silly little things that she came up that seemed so profound to her in the moment. And so those two were such a great pair in that way. So great question, Jay. I really like the way that you phrased that one there, because there are these pairings, even when they were setting up the 9, they were putting together certain people on the team because of how they backed each other up, how they had strengths, how they had relations, how they complemented each other. That was kind of a subtle theme throughout the book.
Boy, I wish we would get an animated series of all of this.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Come on, Dave Filoni, where are you at in all of this? Let's go.
All right, I think it's around to me for my question. So let's talk about Azlin Rell in this book here. And of course, we know, again, another character that showed up in the manga first and then was imported into Kevin Scott's comics and then later both the adult and young adult novels in here. So a character that definitely had some of the more humbler beginnings in the storytelling and then got a bigger role here. I found him incredibly interesting, and I haven't really decided what I think about him overall. He's been doing everything. He's fallen to the dark side because he wants to protect the Jedi Order. At least that's what he keeps saying. And he gouged out his eyes because he was afraid. And everything he's been doing is because he's afraid of the Nameless and he wants to find some way to combat them. And then ultimately, when they're there on Sophros, and he's got the Rod of Ages, and he has this opportunity to counteract Marchion's row to the Nameless to kill themselves, and he says live, and he has that inner dialogue where he's talking, and even Reath challenges him on this, that that's kind of pathetic that after all this time you fall into the dark side, you're going to use that power just to wipe out the Nameless, the galaxy is going to fall, when you really have a chance to show your fear who's boss in all this. And then he does. And Azlin says, he gives the counter command live, but he needs the Reath and Ty's help in order to get the whole thing to go through. And then afterwards, it's like once he's made that decision, he's no longer afraid of the Nameless, but he's still on the dark side, and even goes so far to bleed a lightsaber crystal out of all of this. So I've just babbled on about Azlin here, and a complicated character. Greg, I'd love to know what you thought about him over the course of this novel and his history.
And again, it's one of those elements where if you read the beginning, it's like you'd never expect such a major force to kind of enter so late in the High Republic in some ways, and you tracked it just now quite nicely that he did appear a few places, but it's like I as a reader didn't expect him to be a major part of this kind of finale, and then he did so. I think I struggled a bit because I really liked him in the Hannibal Lecter mode from the last couple books, where you would go visit his cell and kind of he'd say enigmatic things and tempt Reath primarily and act in those ways. But I do think that one of the Project Luminous kind of prompts was what makes the Jedi afraid. And I absolutely think that inspired so many things along the way, particularly the Nameless, of course, but also the Drengir, right, are pretty terrifying as well. And yet, when those scary things were in the story, so much of it had to be about the Jedi overcoming that, right? Like, yes, we got a lot of the Nameless affecting Jedi, particularly before this book, but we had to eventually overcome those and contain it, and and then the real twist is actually fight for them, right? Not fight against them. But I do think it really helped to have this character be so deeply shaken by them, right? And we hear all the time that anger, fear, and aggression lead to the dark side, but I don't know that we ever really see fear completely capture a character. And you can make the argument for Anakin, it's acting out of fear of loss and so on, of course, but to have somebody like so deeply shaken to their core was really powerful in the end for me. And I think a reminder that and Dennis, you just traced it out, like that we all let our fears take over sometimes, and we need the support of others. And gosh, we hadn't even mentioned Ty until just now, which is madness to me. I love Ty, and yet there's so much in this book. And it is kind of a really exciting moment. And then we get the ending, which is not he's redeemed. It's all right in the galaxy again. It's that's another string somebody. I swear Cavan's gonna do that one. That just for some reason feels like Cavan Scott will do Reath hunting him down. Although Reath is Claudia Gray's character, of course, but it does feel like a good like end point or kind of string that could be developed as we continue across the galaxy. And the one other finale piece which we haven't mentioned is the Art of the High Republic Volume 2 by Kristen Baver just came out, which is those books are art books first and foremost, but they're very much behind the scenes books, kind of telling you how all the ideas came together. And I will just say there is some terrifying Azlin art in that. They, and I think we've seen it in some places, but I like they pushed it very far at times in their kind of blue sky period. So a very enjoyable character, a very enjoyable ending, and role he played here would be my main thoughts on it.
Oh, absolutely. And I adore the Hannibal Lecter reference because it's so spot on, first of all. And I have to say, Azlin Rell was one of those kind of characters that I would have just glanced over. I mean, when we first were introduced to him, yes, he was this weird, kind of tragic story about how fear can get the best of you. And obviously, the Nameless uh, got to his core, essentially. But I think that, and talking about Ty York being a monster hunter, in a lot of ways, I mean, Aslan really was a monster. And and to your point also, and both of you, about fear, I mean, that's exactly what Reith tells Ty at one point, is that he's not evil, he's just afraid. And for Aslan, I think it's the perfect example. There's a few different instances in this book of, you have to, as Yoda would say, unlearn what you have learned. And, Aslan learned to be afraid. He learned, I mean, he literally gouged his own eyes out so that he wouldn't have to endure what his soul was seeing with this torment from the Nameless. And it was only when he overcame that fear, and he actually, at one point in the book, he even starts reciting the Jedi Code again. And then he kind of gets sight back, not sight as in, vision per se, but he's able to, it's kind of a fuzzy force vision sort of a thing. So just opening himself back up to that, and once again, kind of unlearning what he has learned. And I can imagine that those art representations would be the stuff of nightmares, because I mean, even just the way that Charles Soule explains when he takes off the goggles, and like the sound that it's probably making, and like Reith is just, oh, like, here it comes, kind of thing, here we go again. and and for Aslan, it's his own self-built prison walls in a lot of ways that he had to break out of, and he had to, embrace. And Reith was one of the ways he was kind of the conduit to a lot of that. And I love, as you said, Dennis, too, like he ended up calling him pathetic. Like, he started just calling him out, like, come on, dude, like, this is enough. You are pathetic. Like, let's just. And Az was like, don't talk to me like I'm a child. And he's like, well, then don't act like one, basically, is what he told him. And I love that about Reith, and that he stood up to him, because here we have this kid that was, this bookworm, and didn't even want to leave the temple. And now look at all the things that he's doing. But, as far as Aslan goes, yeah, wow, what a character arc, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my final thoughts on that is just simply that is, he was largely absent in phase 1. And I mean, he was. And then, for him to come up in phase 2 and phase 3 this way and have such an impact, it was really quite a triumph for the High Republic storytelling there. I'm really curious what happens for that character next, because we know Reith is out there looking for him. This is a character, every time we were getting dialogue and Aslan's inner thoughts, and it was always about this fear. He was afraid. And that's why he was, so interested in wiping out the Nameless here. Then the Nameless were gone. He no longer had that fear to power his way through the dark side. And yet he still poured something into that crystal in order to bleed it. We've got so many instances now across Star Wars canon of characters bleeding lights, kyber crystals. And Darth Vader did one in the comics, and then we've seen in Jedi Survivor it happened, and we've seen a number of places there, and they're always pouring some sort of hate, something in there. And so I'm just wondering what that was at the end for Aslan, that he poured into that crystal, and he did it so effortlessly compared to the likes of Anakin. I mean, that crystal nearly beat him when it happened. Kirkin Falah, who was a prominent character here in the High Republic. That was his lightsaber crystal that happened too. So anyway, just some other thoughts. Let's go around again. I think we've hit most of the big points of this, but there are a few other topics. Greg, do you have something else that you wanted to bring on?
Yeah, although you have me just daydreaming about the scene in the Acolyte with the essentially the bleeding of the crystal, right?
Yeah,
and so I'm just like, man, that was so unexpected and so cool to kind of see it like that. But I'll put my daydreams aside. So I think in terms of strands we haven't talked about, there were some kind of I teased my co-host Jen, who's Subchakchai, who's been on this show on Long Take Review, because we refer to like people who see a normal amount of movies on our film review podcast as normies, right? And amongst all these like larger than life heroes, we do have a few normies in the mix who aren't Jedi and aren't evil, or Nihil and so on. And so I want to kind of throw out there, I want to hear your two opinions. Among those would be the Colman family, right? That are kind of the beginning, and their chapters are always labeled as interludes, where we get a kind of update on what's happening with this family. And then I would also put in Pika and Joss, right? Who I very much enjoyed particularly their plot line, and it struck me that like they were there in Light of the Jedi, and they got some of their own short stories in Star Wars Insider, another very rare piece of the High Republic project. And it's kind of impressive how much of these characters we've experienced. So I want to ask, did you like when we visited kind of either of those plot lines, or because my personal reaction was like, I found myself when we got particularly to the family, I was like, oh, these people again. And yet, like, I understand, I think, why maybe they're there, but I was like, oh, maybe I could just flip a few pages and get back to the Jedi or the bigger event. So how'd you feel about the normies in the mix?
Well, for me, I guess the Coleman family, I hate to call them placeholders, but it did allow us time to sort of take stock and breathe a little bit and go back to, as you said, the normies. I like that term. And, just seeing how this was affecting people around the galaxy. And we're obviously just focusing on one family here, but their story is kind of representative of what was going on a much larger scale all over the galaxy. Here were these families that may have gotten separated, and they were facing, struggles of their own, either through physical disability or just the fact that, they had to struggle to make ends meet, or, whatever the case may be. And so we got this, sort of down to earth perspective of what the everyday Joe was going through, if you will, with the blight and trying to survive. So do I think that that particular storyline was absolutely necessary? I mean, I definitely could have done without it, but I mean, did I oppose it? No, definitely not. Now, Josh and Pika, I love them. I just think that their story is so endearing, because their relationship is, not quite on the same level as like a Han and Leia, where they're giving it to each other, back and forth all the time. But, Pika definitely is, she's a self-rescuing princess, if you want to call her that. She can hold her own, kind of a thing. But I also like the way that they tied it in with Eriadu, and the fact that these Eriaduans, if that's how you pronounce it, they are tough cookies, and they're not going to take things without putting up a fight. And I just think, again, with the whole Tarkin, backstory and the generational, kind of thing that was worked into that too. But again, the fact that Pika was pregnant and they were trying to get this baby delivered without having to worry about too much of what was going on in the galaxy, and then they get thrown right into the mix of things. So their story, I did like revisiting, and I like the way that it was tied in. But the Colemans, I could have taken it or left it, honestly, either way. But Dennis, how do you feel?
I like the Colmans, and here's why. It's, the book starts with them, and then they start off each section of the book, what's going on with their travesties and their travails as they deal with the blight on their homeworld, Stavara. But it was one of the first points I put in my note, actually, was about them. And the reason why is because they ground all of this. We're not Jedi. We're not admirals in the Republic Defense Coalition. We are, they give us a perspective of what's happening to their world. There's no Jedi there to save them at that time. And so they are trying to pack up and get out. And so you've got Raiden, the father, who's trying to get his family out the door. Don't bring everything you own. We don't have time for that. We got to get down the street. And then he gets infected and he's still trying to save his family, but not expose them to any more danger from the blight. And then you got Kalina, the mother of all this, who's bound to a hover chair of all this because she's got a disability of sorts. And then you got Davitt and Shauna, who get separated from some point, and they, at this point, are thinking they have to fend for themselves. Buildings are falling down around them. The street is falling underneath of them. They bring the terror of the blight and make it concrete. They make it real under this. Yes, it's not the heroic space opera that we get with the Jedi and with everything else that's going on, but I did like getting their perspective. And that final appearance when we get from them, where they are up on the top of the building, and they kind of resigned themselves that this may be it, but if we go, we're going out as a family. Then all of a sudden Ryan's foot starts hurting because the blight is gone, and he's now feeling that pain. And they come for that hug. It was moving for me. That really touched me when that happened. That this is they stuck it out against all odds and all this, and they survived, and they lived through that horror. I mean, we've seen traumas in our lives from just the last 25 years. 9/11, COVID, various wars that have happened and that are happening now. But in many of those instances, we aren't the boots on the ground. We aren't the ones that are there. And so to get the perspective, I think did lend something to this book. It's one thing when Lena So is in the Senate building and they've got certain platforms blacked out that represent who's stuck behind the inclusion zone, and other platforms that represent worlds that are inflected by the blight. It's one thing to tell us, it's another to show us. So for me, the normies worked in this situation. Turning to Joss and Pika, as much as I like Mark Thompson's narration, the Southern drawl that he tries to give Joss just does not work for me. And so I always had to go back and read those because I just wanted to get that dialogue with a Star Wars voice in my mind, if you will. That aside, I really liked them too. And I do kind of like how they were the B-list actors throughout the entire High Republic, popping in here and there. We got to see them interact with the crew of the vessel at times. We got to see them in the short stories from the Insider. And beyond them, the real perspective we had on the Battle of Eriadu was Admiral Carnara, I believe his name was. And so, yeah, he's an admiral, but he's not a Jedi. He's not one of the Nile, or whatever. In a way, he's a hyper normie, if you will. But they are perspectives. They're again boots on the ground type people. Josh inadvertently kicks the whole thing off on Eriadu when he's talking to his bartender about, I got a 8-month pregnant wife at home, and I'm clomping around too much, keeping her up, so she sent me out to get a drink. But now that I'm here, I can't help but notice you Uriadans are pretty tough, but yet you just let these Nile hang out. And he totally pushes the bartender into doing something about all of this and kicks everything off. I loved it. I love those two. I love that, the last time we get to see them, they've had their baby boy. They go back to that bar and show this guy, who meant something to them. This is what happened here. And just another slice of High Republic life. They worked for me very well.
That was pretty compelling as a response, Dennis. And actually, you were making me think of the beautiful emotional moment in Toy Story 3 where the little toys are going to the fire and they all just hold hands and say we're going down together if we're going down. And that's made me cry every time I've ever seen that movie.
I slammed my fist on my on my armrest. I was like, you are not bringing me this movie to see these toys get destroyed in a fire. I was so upset during that happened, especially since my kids were little. Anyways. Yeah.
But I do just want to completely agree on I wanted to bring up Pika and Joss because it's really stirring. I also am pretty sure I got kicked out of the house much in the same fashion when my wife was pregnant because I clomp around as the case may be. But it reminded me a lot too of Cassian. I believe in Jeddah says like this whole city's about to blow, and we don't really see that happen. We see the destruction, obviously, but like the city doesn't get a chance to kind of bubble up in this way. And I think that exact mood was there in Eriadu, and I did love that it was, a very deliberate choice to be like, no, I think we have reached our limit and let's go. Who better than a bartender to sense when someone's reached their limit and time to start?
And I just love the way he like filled up the mugs and brought them over to them out right before he pulled out a blaster and shot them. I mean, totally cold.
But it worked.
It worked.
That's good stuff.
Jay, your turn.
Well, I just want to expand again on the idea of unlearning what you've learned, because Avar had to do that with her song in the Force when they got to Sophoros. See, we can say that now.
Mm.
And because she couldn't sense anything, and she realized that the absence of the song was the opposite of the light side, it was the dark side speaking. And so just being able to balance that. And then again with Azlin, but also just with the nameless in general. I mean, we were basically told from the very beginning, and rightfully so in the storytelling, that these were evil creatures, that they were just ruthless, and here it's because they were being forced to be, and that wasn't their true nature. And so we get to unlearn that in the end, and that they were just trying to exist, and here comes along Markion Rowe, in that way too. And with Ghirra Starros also, I mean, she's her character throughout this whole thing. I mean, obviously she's been a minion of Markion, and then some. I mean, you talk about sleeping with the enemy kind of a thing. But she, in the end, she ended up, how do I want to put this? She basically went to Lena So and said, I want to, negotiate the terms of the Nile surrender, but yet she got nothing out of it. So did she unlearn anything? Probably not. She got away with, basically robbing the candy store in a lot of ways. But these other instances, yeah, I was just really impressed with that as far as looking at things from that whole other perspective. And again, just unlearning what you've learned. So, Greg, what do you
Mhm.
think of that?
I mean, I think not only is it an impressive theme to pull out, but to be able to express it as a Yoda quote at that, I mean, it's masterfully done, Jay, and I think that's really good. So, you're making me wish I still taught literature so I could give a good grade on that response. But it is a really powerful lesson for this day and age. And I know Star Wars fandom has a lot of perspectives, so we won't get too specific. But one of the things I think we're all struggling with is that we are so set in our belief systems, and we don't accept those who don't agree with us. Right? Actually, it comes down to Star Wars, right? I have many good conversations, and then we realize we disagree about Last Jedi, and I end those conversations very quickly. Right? So, I do think that reminding us in the realm of Star Wars that our initial impressions are our assumptions, right? And we've talked about so many characters that your initial impression would dismiss, right? And Azlin probably first and foremost in this batch of characters, and yet how all of these characters have to kind of go internal in as they go into the mysterious planet. They go internally into facing down their biggest assumptions, their biggest values. They get those values challenged and come out reassessing them, having relearned them or having done that. I think that's a not just well observed as a theme, but it's a really powerful theme for Charles Soule and the, I assume, the Project Luminous team in general, to have put at kind of the heart of this, to be that we need to all be willing to think about our assumptions and move beyond that. I'll reference again the High Republic art book, particularly in regards to the Nameless, because it is pretty powerful. I probably in May would have said, "Oh yeah, they're gonna go and they're just gonna slaughter a bunch of monsters, and it's gonna be
Mhm.
great." And the fact that it became, "How do we save them? How do we repatriate them?" Was pretty powerful. In the art book, they discussed that they would. It sounded from the descriptions like the Nameless was the hardest thing to lock down in terms of appearance, because they really had to get it right for the comics. And it is a it's I think it's the comic series with the investigator, is that Captor.
Emmerich
um
Captor, yeah.
yeah, that's where they first appeared visually, so that's when they had to lock it in.
Mhm.
And really what they eventually went with that got us to the final design is they used the model of starving animals, right? And I don't want to diminish a very serious issue when you see abused or starving animals, but it is a way to remind us that sometimes what is evil is just misunderstood, or it comes from suffering. And to make that kind of the heart of unlearning about these creatures and finding your Jedi compassion, pretty powerful stuff to go from the nameless and the turning to ash to that. It's impressively done. So I think I can't promise a full High Republic reread, but I think you've inspired me that as I go through this, I want to kind of take that phrase and look more and more, because I do think that's a key unlocking of this.
Awesome. Dennis?
Yeah. So one of the I was paying particular attention to Avar when I was finishing up the reread today, and the notion that I love her view of the Force, which is the song of the Force, and how she couldn't hear it when she was there, and then she theorized that you have frequencies and you have counter frequencies, and when they interact, you get silence. And then so she steps out of that area with the Shri Karai, and then she's in the dark, and then she has to lean into Elzar's experience with that in order to hear it. And then she hears it, and she hears all those fantastic things. Fantastic. That's not what I want to call it. There's all those fantastic observations, I should say, that she has about the dark side, about it's this, path of loneliness as compared to the light, whereas their togetherness, and there's the discordance in the dark, but it's still its own song. It is there. It's just it's a counter song to the light. Worked out really well for me. I like that a lot. And yes, unlearning what you have learned is a fantastic way of looking about it. Ghirra Starros, who I was going to bring up for my final point, but since you included her in the question, I'm going to spend most of my time here talking about her. I was so angry that she got away with it. And that doesn't make me dislike the book. It just makes me, it's like, oh, I'm so frustrated with this, because there's real life examples, and I'm not going to name anyone, of this all the time, that people that they find a way, they dig themselves, they take that shovel and they dig they dug a hole for themselves, and then they just dig a path right back to the surface. And that is Ghirra Starros on this. I think she was a little foolhardy to ever believe that she was ever going to turn the Nile into a respectable state, that she was going to convince Marchion that we can impose order, we can impose rules, and we can make a real state out of the Nile that's in here. And these people were marauders. They were joining up because they didn't have direction. They could go in, they could be themselves, and they were causing chaos over the place. They did make mention at the end of this book that there were some worlds that that were reluctant to come back to the public because the Nile had shown them a different way of doing stuff. And so there's that. But just this notion that Ghirra's got blood on her hands. She enabled Marchion in all of this, and yet she was able to play the card that I'm a victim in all of this. I was misled. And this, that, and the other, despite the fact she was the one showing up on Coruscant, trying to negotiate Lena. So instead of just staying there, she went back to Marchion. I mean, so she's good at what she does. And I want another story where she gets brought down. And the end where she'd hired a private investigator to look for her daughter, Avon Stars. And then the investigator was supposed to deliver this heartfelt apology. And she was so desperate to repair that relationship with her daughter. But then the report that came back to her was that Avon was deceased. And in that moment, she was like, I won nothing. And so in a way, I guess she did get her comeuppance on all this, because that is, was unsaid in so many ways. She was disappointed with that Avon was not willing to look at things from her point of view. But at the end, she realizes that Avon's right. And when she tries to deliver that apology, Avon's not there to receive it. And so it's like, I did all this. I got nothing out of what I was doing. And my redemption amounts to nothing, because the one person that it matters for the most isn't there to receive it. So that's my take on Ghirra. Wow, we are nearly at an hour and a half on this recording. So I'm going to wrap up my one last question. It may be kind of a lightning round of this. Thinking of the stories, Greg, you made mention of this earlier in the discussion. There are some jumping off points for here that we could get more stories with these characters set in this era. If you were to pick one, which one would you want to see the most? And try to stick to one. Jay, I know you've probably got 3 in mind, but Greg, which one would you most? And we can all say the same thing. It doesn't matter. But what would you like to learn about the most next?
I mean, I'm picturing the question as I have rubbed the magic lamp, and I get to do that. I am going to pick one, but I am going to cheat just a little and say I do think there's more hope that we learn more about Nubs, Kai, and Liss. And if I'm being a good dad, that's the one I'd have to make my wish for, because the High Republic children's show is a hit in my house. My daughter calls him Nubsy Bubsy. I don't know why she came up with that, but Nubsy Bubsy, I share with fandom if you want to name him that. Gosh, the one I think I would have to choose, and she didn't feature prominently in this book, is Keeve. I really loved Keeve. I think I already loved Keeve, and I know we get hints in Dooku Jedi Lost of kind of where some of her story is, and we get broad strokes. But I think I loved Keeve from the beginning, and because she was the focused character of so many of the comics, I felt very close to her at times. And then Cavan explains that Christina Ariel, host of the High Republic show, is the inspiration for her. And I love all the positivity she brings to fandom. So I think, I loved so many characters on the list. We already mentioned Porter. We already mentioned Avar. But to me, Keeve is the one that I think I'm going to mourn my time with the most, right? I valued all the time. And that's the character I'll miss a lot, though I could nominate many, many more. Boy, Jay, you got called out. So I hope my cheating
questions.
I hope my cheating helped open space for you.
Well, I love would you say Nubsy Ubsy? Because didn't Ty call Burryaga Buggy Uggy at one point
yes.
in the novel? Oh, yeah, that cracked me up. If I had to pick, I think one of mine that's definitely towards the top is Lorna D. And I absolutely cherish the stories that we got with her. I mean, the Tempest Runner, the audio dramas, just were fantastic. And I think that there could be a lot that could be done in the future with that character, especially now that she's, walking that, again, fine line of the moral ambiguity that she's gotten herself into, and she's kind of turned a corner, but yet not. She's very Asajj Ventress in that way, and Asajj is definitely one of my favorite characters of all time as well. So I would have to say Lorna D is definitely at the top of my list for sure. I would love to see what happens with her next.
Mm-hmm. For me, I think the number one story that's left open coming out of this book is Azlin Rell and Reese Silas. Because Aslin's got, out there, he's trying to decide what to do next. He's just bled a lightsaber, and Reith has taken it upon himself to track Azlin down. And that is begging for a specific story right now on this. And so that one I want to see. Because, look, Avar and Elzar, I feel like we've got a very satisfactory end to all of that. You brought up Greg, Vernestra did not necessarily get we know what happens. We see her in the Acolyte and the like, but so we've got more stories with her. And if you read Wayseeker, a number of characters that show up in this kind of get an epilogue type of ending or follow up on their adventures there. But for me, Stellan Gios was my first favorite character in the High Republic, and then they killed him. And I saw that over your shoulder there. I've been admiring it this entire time, as well as the Star Wars Lego logo, which I've got sitting on my shelf here. But but then somewhere along the line, just watching Reith grow up and how wise he became. And again, I don't want to pick on Mark Thompson too much, but I almost felt like he made Reith seem too inexperienced with the voice he gave him throughout the audiobook in here, especially when we got to see Into the Light how much he matured and became a leader, that I felt like Reith really deserved a lot of respect in this book, especially because as you pointed out earlier, Greg, this is a kid that was in the archives, was happy there, and he's gone out and explored the galaxy, realized that he's got a responsibility and a bigger place in everything, and he's championed Azlin Rell. He's not evil, he's scared, as you said earlier, Jay. And now Azlin left them, and they don't know what he's going to do next. And he is the potential weak link with revealing the location of Sophros there. So he's got to get that set up. So to me, that's just begging for a story. So I hope we get it. And let Charles Soule write it. That would be my number one choice. So, yeah.
I'd love to follow the vessel too, like the adventures of Affy, and especially now that Nan has turned the corner, and see if Geode regenerates, and if it's all right.
Leox, yeah. Right.
We'll find out.
Okay. Well, like I said, we've done an hour and a half on this, and I am sure we could go all evening on this book with diving into some of the details. And I know once I hit the stop button on this recording, there's going to be a half dozen things that I wish we would have brought up. But at some point, the conversation has to end, especially since I have to edit this. But with that being said, I want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust, discussion of Trials of the Jedi. We hope you've enjoyed the episode. And if you did, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your podcast of choice, rate, review, those type of things. We really appreciate all that. And of course, you can find all episodes of the show over on retrozapp.com. Greg, thanks again for joining us. We want to remind everybody where they can find everything that you're up to.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. I get a lot of invitations, but not enough about books, and you all have made me feel very special when I get the call for a book. So, people can find me online. I spend most of my social media time only on Instagram now. I'm at EyonCanon, EYEONCANON. And I'll just put in a plug that Greg over at Rebel Base Card and we do the breakfast series of Star Wars show reactions. And because we had to all take such a fast spin through Andor, just this week we are starting what we're calling Second Breakfast about Andor. So we're going to go back through one episode at a time. The conversation's a little looser. We're breaking out of our questions format. But Andor, to me, is like the High Republic, is such a special part of fandom that, it's fun to get to go back through it and savor them. And I have no doubt the two of you will be getting contacted by Greg eventually when the time comes around. So if you have a favorite Andor, let Greg know because it's really been fun to revisit again. And first guest up is Ross Holleben, who I think has been everywhere talking about Andor, but he's got no bottom. So it's great.
Nice.
So thank you again.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Greg.
And Jay, you want to go ahead and share our social media contacts and where else we can find on the internet?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. We are so conveniently found Facebook and Instagram. Very easy to remember at Podcast Stardust. And we do maintain some Pinterest boards. And we also have our YouTube outlets, which contain both the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube music. So head over to both of those, like, subscribe, and share those out. And let us know what you thought of this episode and all of our thoughts on the High Republic in general, and especially Trials of the Jedi. And if you'd like to refresh your closet, if you are in need of a sweatshirt with the fall weather coming up, or anything else for that matter, t-shirts, coffee mugs, anything in between, we have 7 different show logo designs available on TeePublic, and the link to that is in our show notes.
Okay, upcoming on the show, Friday, end the week with some Star Wars news, and then on Monday we are back to the Clone Wars rewatch, so make sure you join us for those. With that said, thanks for listening to episode 934 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and until next time, may the Force be with you.